When we picture a monopoly, we imagine a dominant, monolithic force dictating terms to a fragmented market, an entity setting prices simply because it can. But if a government wants to regulate that entity or extract tax revenue, intuition isn't enough. We must map its exact mathematical behavior. The difference begins with demand. Under perfect competition, a single firm is a price taker. They face a flat, horizontal demand curve. They can sell as much as they want, but only at the market price. A monopoly faces the exact opposite. Because it is the only supplier, it faces the entire downward-sloping market demand curve. It is a price setzer, a price maker. But this power comes with a strict mathematical constraint. To sell more, it must lower its price on all units. This forces a split. The marginal revenue detaches from the price and falls at a much steeper rate. This graph models the monopoly's constraint. By mapping marginal revenue against marginal cost, it maximizes profit at the Cournot Point intersection. But it doesn't charge that price. Instead, it projects that quantity up to the demand curve to find the maximum price consumers will pay. As a result, a profit-maximizing monopolist will mathematically always set a price significantly higher than what it costs to produce the final unit. That gap between the cost of production and the final price has severe consequences for the broader economy. This chart shows exactly how economists measure that societal damage. In an ideal, perfectly competitive market, production continues until price exactly equals marginal cost. Every consumer willing to pay the cost of making the product gets to buy it. But the monopoly's restricted quantity creates a massive gap between the high price charged and the actual cost of production. This means there are consumers willing to pay more than it costs to make the item, but who are still priced out of the market. The monopolist could profitably produce more units for these specific buyers, but doing so would require lowering the price across the board, which would cannibalize the massive profit margins on their existing sales, so production stops. That zone of unmade transactions, represented by this triangle, is the Wohlfahrtsverlust, or deadweight loss. These are mutually beneficial trades that never occur. It is value that simply vanishes from the economy entirely. Monopoly power creates a permanent, systemic destruction of total economic surplus, a market failure that persists even when compared to the simple problem of high prices. This creates a precarious dilemma for policymakers. How do you extract wealth from a monopoly to fund public goods without accidentally extending that deadweight loss? To find the optimal solution, we can test 3 different tax instruments mathematically. We start with the Pauschalsteuer, or lump sum tax. This is a massive, one-time fixed fee charged to the corporation, like a licensing fee just to operate. We set up the monopolist's profit function, price times quantity, minus the cost of production, minus the fixed tax, T. To find the exact peak of their profits under this new condition, we take the mathematical derivative, known as the first-order condition. Because the tax T is a constant, it drops out of the derivative entirely. The equation resolves exactly back to the baseline. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. The optimal quantity doesn't move. Next, we test the Gewinnsteuer, a profit tax. Here, the government takes a strict percentage of the firm's total bottom-line profit. We rewrite the profit function, wrapping the entire baseline profit in the multiplier 1 minus t, representing the tax rate. When we calculate the first-order condition to maximize this new equation, something identical happens. The tax multiplier simply divides out of both sides. Once again, we are left with MR equals MC. Think of profit as a mountain. These 2 taxes lower the mountain's total height, but they never shift its peak to the left or right. Therefore, fixed fees and pure profit taxes are completely allocatively neutral. The monopolist takes the financial hit on their balance sheet, and consumers see 0 change in the price at the register. Finally, we test the Verbrauchsteuer, or unit tax. This is a tax levied on every single physical item produced or sold. Here is the final profit function. Notice the term at the end, minus t times q. This creates a critical mathematical divergence. Because the tax t is tied directly to quantity, it does not disappear during the derivative. Instead, the equation resolves to marginal revenue equals marginal cost plus the tax. This forces a shift in the monopolist's underlying logic. The cost to produce the next unit has literally increased. When we map this back to the visual market graph, the entire marginal cost curve shifts uniformly upward by the exact amount of the tax. Because the cost curve is now higher, it intersects the marginal revenue line further to the left. The monopolist's optimal quantity just shrank, and the consequence for the consumer is immediate. That restricted quantity is projected up to the demand curve, landing on a newly elevated price. The impact on societal efficiency is devastating. The dead weight loss expands, wiping out even more mutually beneficial trades. It is a harsh paradox. By taxing the product directly, the government mathematically forces the monopolist to restrict output even further. A unit tax directly exacerbates the baseline market failure. In the attempt to punish the monopoly, the policy actively hurts the consumer. This mathematical experiment yields a clear blueprint for regulation. When we look at the scorecard, we see exactly which policies alter the firm's behavior, raise prices, and expand the welfare loss. There is a common public intuition that greedy corporations simply pass all taxes and fees onto consumers. Under monopoly conditions, that assumption is mathematically false. A profit-maximizing entity cannot pass on a pure profit tax or a lump sum fee. Attempting to raise prices to cover those fixed costs would force them off their Cournot Point, meaning they would actually lose more money. Unit taxes are passed on precisely because they alter the fundamental cost of producing the next unit. Efficient regulation requires surgical precision in what is being targeted. To control a price setzer without destroying the market, policy must aggressively target the economic rent. It must leave the marginal unit of production strictly alone.